likely we are to continue that pendulum down the road. First of all, we're going to do an activity. We're going to find out our caloric balance. So this is the only time you'll hear this in class. Get your phones out. Or you can use your calculator. All right, so I'm hoping the phone's out by now. What we're going to do now is find out basic caloric needs. So how many we need just to stay how you are. So nothing put into this equation, not how much you guys work out. If you're just pretty much working, living normally, this is how many calories you need. So what you need to do is times your body weight by 22. So I weigh 80 kilos. I'm going 80 times 22. My baseline calories are 1760. Cool. Thumbs up if you've got your number. Awesome. Cool. All right. Next, you're going to add in your activity level. So this is just hold your horses on this one as well, because when I do this with people, they're like, oh yeah, I'm really active. I train. But I want you to think about that. If you are active, that means you've got an active lifestyle and active job. So if you work in an office, I don't consider that active. That's more sedentary and light activity. If you work on a construction yard, that's active or very active. If you are maybe working at a restaurant and continuously on your feet, that's more towards the active side. So I'm using me as an example. I am light. I have light activity. I sit down at the desk a lot of the time, do some coaching as well. So I'm on my feet a lot, but still in the light activity. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to choose the number 1.5 because I'm on the low end of that. And I'm going to times that by my baseline, which is 1760. So you can do that now to find your maintenance calories. And best off to be conservative with these numbers as well. From what I know, no one will really be in the very active part, even if you're training quite a bit. There's a couple of measurements that we can use to work this out. I chose this one because everyone on the call will be training. And there's different sorts of measurements for people who are more sedentary. But from there, you'll come out with a number, and that's your baseline calories. How many calories you need to stay where you are right now, and takes into account your training as well. Has everyone got that? Yeah? Cool. All right. So with that number, the bare bones of it says in order to lose weight, you need to eat less calories than that. In order to mass gain, in order to gain weight, you need to eat more calories than that. And you can track that and measure that along the way. Now, recapping on weight loss. This is weight loss, not fat loss. We need to take in more calories, less calories than we expend. There's heaps of factors that influence calories in and calories out, and your baseline calories are dictated by your weight and your activity level. And you cannot tone muscle. We must remember that one. So, is there any questions about calories? And you can type these in. Sorry, I'm bringing myself back to the meeting. Okay. Has Steve had a haircut? Looks very sharp, thank you. He always looks sharp. Well, thank you very much. Any questions about what we've discussed? Okay, excellent. We can move on then. If you've got any questions, just type them into, excellent. All right, we've got a question. How accurate are Fitbit trackers in measuring calories? Good question. This isn't something I've had a lot of experience with, the trackers. I don't use those. But one thing I can say is there's something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is pretty much the calories that you expend that are not associated with exercise. So this is the stuff that gets done walking, breathing, talking. And there's been some really cool studies on fidgeting and how people who fidget and are just like more highly wired are burning more calories than those that are more sedentary. So in terms of the Fitbit, I know that it's very hard to track NEAT. Like that needs to be done in a really controlled setting. So the Fitbit isn't going to be able to track those calories. It might be able to track your steps and your heart rate and the exercise that you're doing, but it's going to be missing a big chunk in the terms of NEAT. Okay, next question. Do you find that often people who are overweight but are under eating actually lose weight when they start to eat more? Even though calories out, really good question. Even though calories in and calories out would suggest they should be losing weight. Really good question, and the next section is going to cover that. My WHOOP average calories per day is 3,000, which is 1.7 times my base, so pretty spot on given my activity and work as a firefighter. That's good to know, yeah. And that's an interesting one, Brad, because some of these equations don't always add up. You'll be like, shit, that's a lot more than I eat already. And you know, it is just an equation. So there's going to be some exceptions along the way, but it's good to know that that one fits in. And it's designed for active people, that one. Peak is 4,000 calories. That's a lot of calories. And that might be, you know, if we're exercising more, then yeah, you sometimes need to lift. Yeah, sometimes you need to lift your caloric intake. Any more questions about calories? Cool. And the one, hello, Luke. All right, let's soldier on, because that question about people who are overweight but under eating, this is, are all calories equal? That's a good question, and that's something we're going to talk about in our macros. There is, like, at the end of the day, a calorie is a calorie, but we're going to find that some foods are really dense in calories and some aren't. All right, I'm putting away the chat for the moment, guys, just so I can focus on the next part. But thank you for your questions; they were excellent. Okay, let's talk macronutrients now. So macronutrients refer to the carbs, proteins, and fats, otherwise known as macros. So carbohydrates, we've got 4 calories per gram, proteins 4 calories per gram, so they're roughly the same. Fats 9 calories per gram, and I just threw in alcohol because alcohol, it shows all the signs of a macronutrient, even though it's not considered one all the time. It acts in the same way in that we burn it as a fuel source. So carbohydrates, it's important to know that carbs are never just carbs. So you're not going to find a vegetable that's solely carbohydrate, or you might find it, but they're usually a mixture of carbs and fats, or carbs and proteins, or carbs and proteins and fats. It's rare that you find one that's just a protein or just a fat. So when we're entering our foods into an app, it'll tell you, okay, so broccoli is, say, a certain percentage of carbohydrates, certain percentage of protein, maybe like 10% protein, a tiny little bit of fat, and mostly carbohydrates. And this outlines it. So just have a look at this little chart here. It's a good one to work out and just see where our favorite foods are. So you've got the carbs there, you've got the proteins, the fats, and you've got the mixes. A couple of things that are interesting to know. Firstly, milk in the middle. Milk's a bit of a superfood. It's a combination of a nice balance of protein, carbs, and fats. The plant-based protein sources that are often used by vegetarians and vegans to get their protein in are lentils, beans, quinoa. Are not bad protein sources, but what you'll tend to find, they're equally weighted for proteins as they are for carbohydrates. So this matters if you're trying to keep your calories down, but keep your protein up, as you would on a fat loss diet. And that's when you'll see the calories go up. So it's quite tough to get the proteins up with a plant-based diet because the carbs go up at the same time. It can be done, but it just requires a lot of tinkering. Fats also, so they're solely fats down there. You've got a mixture of fat and protein with pork, whole eggs, salmon, nuts, and lamb. One thing I wanted you to see though, and you've probably seen it already, the most delicious foods there are the combination of fats and carbohydrates. And this is really important to know. Like if you're looking to manage your food intake, then avoid stuff that is packed with carbs and also fats. And food manufacturers know this. They know that if you pack something with carbs and fats and maybe a bit of salt as well, that's the sweetest combination of all. And you can eat those things all day. Chocolate, ice cream, fried food, cake. The list is endless. These foods have a couple of things in common. Firstly, they're delicious. And secondly, they don't have any protein in them, very little protein. So really that combination is something, if we're talking fat loss here, we want to stay away from. Because when we, back to our original equation, we're trying to eat less, those foods will just have you eat more and more and more. It triggers a sensation in the brain that shuts off any sort of rationality. And I'm sure we've been through this before. So what they do in the body, carbohydrates, that will do a lot of things, but for the sake of today, they give you energy. So carbs are going to, carbs are going to give you energy. Let's think of like you're doing a CrossFit workout. Carbs are our first source of energy that we're going to use. Fats, they give us some hormone stuff. So they give us some energy through hormone synthesis, also some energy as well. They're not as quick acting as carbohydrates. They'll kick in a little bit later. And proteins, this is the stuff that we gain muscle with. So super important. And I'd argue that proteins is the most important macronutrient there is, because it just works on so many levels. And how these work in terms of our metabolism. Now, if you've been to one of my seminars before, you know I love this analogy of the fire. And this is how we think about our metabolism, how it's working. Our metabolism is like a fire. It's rocking all the time. It peaks and troughs depending on what we're doing and what sort of fuel we put in. So let's think of the carbohydrates like the paper on the fire. When you put the paper on the fire, they go up and then they'll go down pretty quickly. But it does give you a pretty cool source of fuel for a time being. And if it's backed up with sticks and logs, then you're sorted. Fats, this is like the kindling. So this gets the party started. It gives you a pretty long fire, but not long enough. What we really need are the proteins and logs. And the proteins, they're going to stick around for a long time. You can use those to burn, and really they're at the base of the fire, and they should always be there. So our first point of call is carbohydrates. We want to get enough carbohydrates, but not too much, because if we're just fueling the fire with carbohydrate, it's going to go up and then it's going to come down. But what are you going to crave then? You're probably going to crave more paper, more sugar to get the fire started again, particularly if there's not enough protein and fat to rely on for energy. So you might have been in this situation before. So if your breakfast is, say, a high carbohydrate breakfast, think of cereal and toast and a glass of orange juice. By 9 o'clock, you're probably running out of fuel because you've had a quick hit of energy, and you're probably looking around for the next bit of energy in the form of quick carbohydrate. It's going to give you the blood sugar lift again. Let's compare that to someone who has, say, eggs or a smoothie, let's say eggs and avocado and spinach. So eggs, we've got the fats and protein in the eggs. Spinach, you've got some carbohydrates. Avocado, we've got fats. It's a really balanced meal, plenty of protein and fat, a big whack of that. Your blood sugar is going to set off, but it's not going to give you a big hit. You're going to have a long sustained level of energy. By 12 o'clock, you might be hungry again, have your healthy lunch. And you've probably avoided overeating, and you've avoided any sort of blood sugar swings. So it can be a super effective method. This is why people have a really good time on low carb diets, is paying attention to how many carbohydrates you're eating and really dialing in the protein, making sure you've got enough logs on the fire to ensure you don't get yourself into that situation where you're overeating. And this is really interesting when it comes to the food pyramid. I'm sure you guys have seen this one before. With the old eating guidelines. And this was developed by the US Department of Agriculture, who came along and said, hey, we need to eat a hell of a lot more grains. Let's pile those at the bottom of the food pyramid. I think it was, 6 to 11 servings of grains a day, which is crazy. Like all these down here, no protein in them, heaps of carbohydrate, a little bit of fat. And then they're like, oh yeah, we should probably eat some fruits and veg, and let's put some meats up there. So this here, in my opinion, is responsible for a lot of the obesity problems we're having at the moment, because their diet is mostly refined carbohydrates. So very easy to overeat, and it can cause a range of metabolic problems as well. We've come a long way since then. They're not recommending this anymore, but it's still got a long way to go in terms of what governments are recommending. Tracking macros. So this is where we can get a handle on how much protein, carbs, and fats we're eating. So it not only gives you awareness, and it's pretty enlightening to see what we are taking in, but it gives you that power to control our body composition. Yeah, and explains all the wording. Yeah. So when we talk about our macros, these can be really important. It doesn't mean you need to do it all the time. It just means that the information that it gives you can set you on the right path. And I'm going to give you two examples here, Jane and Jeanette. So both the same age, 170 centimeters tall, both 75 kilos, both CrossFit 4 times a week, and they both want to lose 5 kilos. Jane's like, mate, I don't really want to track my macros. I just want to cut my calories. Fine, cool. Jane cuts her calories, decreases calories by 50 grams a week, which is a decent amount. That adds up over time. Jeanette does the same thing. She tracks her calories, cuts her calories, not as much as Jane, but she puts up her protein. She tracks her macros. She eats about 150 grams of protein, which is quite a bit, and keeps the same training. So 2 examples here, and they look eerily similar. Let's see the results. Jane, she only tracked her calories, and she lost 7 kilos, which is epic. 7 kilos is amazing. She looks great. She feels okay. Of that, she's lost 2 kilos of muscle. She's lost 3 kilos of fat. Remember, she's lost weight, which is a combination of muscle, fat, and water, and she's lost water as well. What you'll tend to find is when someone takes down their calories, the water really goes down, often more than anything. Performance goes down. Remember, she doesn't have the muscle that she used to have, so lifting's got a bit harder. And hormone status has gone down. When we dramatically decrease our calories, our hormones have a tricky time. Thinks we've gone through a famine. And often, in Jane's case, if you put yourself through that much stress, then it's going to come back often tenfold. Tenfold, maybe an exaggeration. She's going to add a little bit more weight. If you think about someone being through a famine, the next time they eat food and they're exposed to food, which will happen in our environment, we've got plenty of food to go around, then the body will react appropriately and stack on some body fat for protection. Let's compare this to Jeanette. Jeanette lost 3 kilos. Remember, Jeanette tracked her macros and dialed up her protein. She lost 3 kilos of weight, which is pretty good over the 2 months. But hey, she gained 2 kilos of muscle. So her performance actually increased, and she developed what we call muscle tone. And I said I wouldn't use that, but she has developed the look of muscle tone because she's lost 3 kilos of fat and gained 2 kilos of muscle. So we can see a little bit more muscle definition down here on Jane. And she loses 2 kilos of water, lost a layer of inflammation, which a lot of people have if their diet's not great. Performance has gone up and hormone status has gone up. And this is a really interesting study because I see a lot of these sort of examples with people coming to me. They've lost weight or they're trying to lose weight. A lot of people find, hey, I've only lost 2 kilos, but we'll put them on a body scan and say, hey, we've actually gained muscle because your training's gone through the roof and you're eating enough protein. But look how much fat you've lost. How good's that? You've lost a fat slab of fat there, and the water weight's gone down. And not only do you look great, your performance has gone through the roof as well. And this is why a lot of the diets that we see are not effective because they're simply just reducing calories. If you think about the Weight Watchers, the Jen and Craig's, the old school methods of losing weight, it was just to deprive yourself. And the good news is we don't need to do that. We can just get a little bit more sophisticated and still look good and keep our performance up. Because really health is the main aim here, guys. Losing weight's one thing, but really want to stay healthy while we do it. And this is what Jeanette's done. Okay, question time, tea time for me. Is there any questions about macronutrients? Yep, explains all the hoarding of pasta, absolutely. I found it funny that people actually hoarded pasta over anything else. Like, I'd hoard meat. That'd keep you going for a long time. Pasta, you get hungry and malnourished. A lot of the problems with hunger come from just overeating carbohydrates and not enough protein. So no questions on the macros, guys? Okay. All right, we're going to move on. Cool. Alrighty, let's talk hormones now. So hormones, think of these like messengers in the body. They tell us what to do. So they speak to our brain, and that, as we worked out, can tell us if we're in a caloric deficit or a caloric surplus. And this stuff is super interesting. And this is really my area of work, what I work with people with. Yeah, a lot of it is to do with nutrition, but a lot of it is the hormones that actually dictate our nutritional choices. So this is something I drew up in terms of it talks about hormones, and it's like a cyclical effect. And you may have been on this cycle before. We eat, you can start this anywhere as well. If you eat a lot of calories, you're going to put on fat. If you put on fat, you'll develop some leptin resistance. We're going to talk about that in a tick, where the brain actually reads that you've got fat cells, and it's like, hey, there must be a reason for these fat cells. I'm going to store more fat, or I'm going to have more cravings that's going to cause me to eat more calories. Let's start it up here. Say you've got some cravings. Maybe you didn't get enough sleep. Maybe you're a bit stressed. You're going to put on more weight. Well, sorry, you're going to eat more calories. Then you're going to put on weight. And then you might develop that insulin leptin resistance. Let's take fat storage up here. Fat storage can come from a number of areas. That's going to lead to this, lead to that, lead to that. So it really is a cyclical effect with obesity. It's a cruel circle to be in. And yeah, the number one factor for people putting on weight is actually being overweight in the first place. And there's been all sorts of theories about where this cycle starts. And I've gone back and forth on it. I really don't know whether it comes from the calories or the hormones, but we know that one leads to another. We're going to start with cortisol. Cortisol is our main stress hormone, and this is secreted by the adrenal glands. So we can see a little diagram up here. If we say we're in a stressful situation, like you're in a fight with your partner, or someone cuts you off in traffic, or you're even like in a workout situation, you're going to secrete cortisol for the good. We're going to release cortico-releasing hormone. ACTH comes from the pituitary gland. That leads into the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney, and that produces cortisol. Cortisol gets a bad rap, and we've probably heard about cortisol before. It's our main stress hormone. It's the fight or flight hormone. When we're in a stressful situation, the cortisol goes right up, along with adrenaline and all sorts of stuff. It's an anti-inflammatory hormone. So if a football player gets injured at halftime, they're going to go off and get a shot of cortisone it works in the same way as cortisol. That's going to get them through because it blocks inflammation. Cortisol is there for a reason. It's super important. Without cortisol, I'd actually prefer high cortisol than low cortisol. Low cortisol, you're going to find someone with lethargy, apathy, depression, bad performance in the gym, weight gain. High cortisol, if someone has super high cortisol, can be from a range of reasons, infection, food intolerance, just being overly stressed and reactive. You're going to find someone with high cortisol. Also, weight gain often happens when our cortisol is chronically high. Cortisol ranges throughout the day. So it's going to start off relatively low. If we go to a cortisol pattern here, this is actually taken from a Dutch test, a hormone test that I did on a friend, and she doesn't mind me sharing this. Her cortisol was quite low. We'll get into that in a tick. But the cortisol should start off in the morning pretty low. It peaks about mid-morning. So 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, that's when we're really feeling good, when our cortisol is our highest. And you might find this, I hear it from a lot of people, they feel the most productive at like 9, 10, 11 o'clock. But come afternoon, good luck getting that work done, or good luck getting that workout in at that 3 o'clock time. That's when our cortisol is when it dips down, when it takes a big dip. Because you can see here the dip that it takes, it comes from high to pretty low. So if you're feeling a bit down or like a different person at 3 o'clock, you're not alone. That's the natural cycle of hormones. We don't want it to be a radical cycle where it goes like fully up and fully down, and that's what would happen in this high range here. But likewise, we don't want it to be flatline the whole way. Just want a nice cycle, and it actually goes with the sun. So the best way to think about cortisol is with the sun. The sun goes up, we come up, we get a hit of cortisol. In fact, one of the best things you can do to manage your cortisol rhythm is get morning sun. Really, really good for you. And if you get that morning sun, a good dose of it, like I've been doing with my park workouts this week, then your sleep will improve because your cortisol rhythm is regular throughout the day. Whereas if you don't get that morning sun, if you're exposed to light, particularly in the nighttime, so this is why they say to decrease your exposure to blue light in the nighttime. Blue light's going to produce cortisol. So if you're looking at your phone prior to sleep, and the light can hit any part of the body, we've got receptors everywhere, then that's going to be producing cortisol, blocking your melatonin production. Melatonin is our sleep hormone. They work against each other. Then we won't have the same ability to produce melatonin. So it's very common for people when they're tired and wired and at night their cortisol's high and they can't bring it down, is to keep looking at their phone or some sort of stimulation because the cortisol doesn't want to go down. The best thing you can do, take off your screens, blacken the room, even a herbal tea, a bath can be really good to lower your cortisol so that you can get a good night's sleep. So that's high cortisol. This person here's got low cortisol. Her waking cortisol wasn't too bad, so that's about average. But then she dips right down at mid-morning. So she's feeling shit at about 10 o'clock when she should be feeling great. Afternoon, she perks up again, and nighttime she's at a decent level at nighttime. But overall, it's very low. So her free cortisol throughout the day is super low, and she was feeling pretty average at the time. And that correlated with that cortisol numbers. So a couple of things we're going to do with her, we're going to firstly get some rhythm. We're going to see what's going on at these times that's causing a chronic low cortisol and boost it up somehow. We can use supplements for that. We can use exercise for that, works quite well in the morning when our exercise is going to produce cortisol in a healthy way. And that's going to bring the cortisol up so it can bring ourselves down. It takes a while to reset a rhythm, but it can easily be done. So if you're one of those people that struggles at any time of the day, it could be normal to have that low cortisol, but you can also manage where you put your energy throughout the day, depending on where your cortisol goes. One thing cortisol will do also work with blood sugar. So our blood sugar will go up when we have certain meals or if we're stressed. The cortisol will go up and our blood sugar will follow. And if our blood sugar is high or low, we can get some pretty decent cravings. So it's not rocket science. If we're stressed, we're going to be eating more. Some people eat less when they're stressed, but a lot of people, they'll deal with that stress by eating more. And sometimes if we are really stressed, we won't actually read that we're full or that we're satiated. And this is where we come to the next hormone, leptin. Well, stress. Let's talk about stress a little bit more, actually. So this is you might have seen this one before. I refer to it a lot. It refers to the phases of stress that we go to. And this is probably another seminar that I'll do. This refers to the stages that we go through with stress. The first one is homeostasis, where everything's balanced, everything's cool, everything's normal. We're exposed to stresses, but we're adapting to it. Best way to think about it is with exercise. You're exercising, lifting some weights, and the body is responding. It's growing stronger. Great. But if that cortisol goes up, if that stress goes up, and we don't deal with it, if we're not recovering from it, this is where we find elevated cortisol, chronically elevated cortisol. This isn't a bad situation to be in. A lot of people stay up here for a long time. And what's important to know, if our cortisol is chronically elevated, it eventually starts coming down and breaking down the body. Remember, it's an anti-inflammatory, so when it's high, you're not going to see any symptoms. So if someone's cortisol is always high, they're probably going to be able to push through that assignment or that presentation or that football game. But eventually that cortisol is going to wear off. And when that cortisol wears off, this is when we see weight gain. This is when we see injury, big one, where we see autoimmune conditions. And in my friend earlier, that's where she was. She was in the orange and red down here. Cortisol wore straight off, and that's when she started to feel shit. And what's often interesting with these folk, and a lot of people that are in this phase, they'll start using, it's called them adaptogens or coping mechanisms, coping strategies, pre-workout, excess use of caffeine, even just like the newest training program to get them back here to start feeling good again, because they were feeling great up here. What the hell's happened? I'm doing exactly what I was doing. Yeah, your cortisol's probably worn off, the adrenaline's worn out, and the body's wanting to go back to homeostasis here. And yeah, it's something. This is definitely another webinar, but this happens with chronic exposure to stress. If you're interested in this stuff, I definitely recommend work from Dr. Robert Sapolsky. I'll write that down in the notes. He's the guy who really pioneers stress research. He's worked with a lot of humans and chimps. He's done some awesome research with chronic exposure to cortisol over time and what that does to the brain and the body. Leptin. So this one's our satiation hormone. So this has a lot to do with telling us how, if we're full, essentially. So you might have had situations where you can eat like 2,000 calories, and for some reason you can eat 3,000 calories. You can still eat more. We've all been in that situation before, and it can happen from a number of reasons. For me, if I'm underslept, I'll just be able to eat like a train the next day. If I'm a little bit hungover, if I've had a few drinks one night, doesn't happen that often, but if I do, my appetite the next day will be crazy, and my brain will just be like eat, eat, eat. So that's when leptin comes in. If our leptin signal is weak or broken, that leads to leptin resistance, where we don't recognize the connection between satiation and our stomach. Think of like there's a line that goes from the stomach to the brain. If that's broken, then the brain's like, hey mate, I need food. I can't read that signal. Even though the stomach's like, I'm full, the brain's like, no, we're going to pack on some stuff here. And that can happen from a number of reasons. So this is how leptin resistance works. If leptin is good, then it leads to satiation, happy days, and that can lead to weight loss, because if we're satiated, we're not going to be eating as much food, and we'll be able to manage our appetite a lot better. If that signal is broken, that can lead to hunger and weight gain. Now you're probably asking, well, how can I strengthen my leptin signaling? The basics: weight training, sleep is a huge one, stress, toxins have a big impact they're finding on leptin, refined carbohydrates, delicious food like those fatty and carby foods that we talked about before. That's going to tie into this leptin signaling, and that's going to lead to hunger and overeating. So there's a range of things that go into there. If you're curious about your leptin, you can test for it. I don't test for it, but you can get it tested to see how strong it is. This is how blood sugar works. So blood sugar is not a hormone. Blood sugar is pretty simple. It's just the amount of sugar that's in the blood. When that goes, when that's, call it balanced, our insulin levels are balanced, and that can lead to weight loss. In order for weight loss to happen, our insulin generally needs to be kept at bay. When it comes to blood sugar coming up, that can be due to so many factors: sugary foods, sleep, alcohol, stress. Big one's gut inflammation as well. If you've got inflammation at any level of the body, particularly the gut, we're going to have a higher blood sugar. Insulin's going to go up to deal with that blood sugar, and that signal will be distorted that goes to the brain. That's going to cause us to eat more. That's going to cause us to gain weight. So you might be thinking about some people who fall into these categories of disrupted cortisol signaling, leptin signaling, and a lot of it just comes back to some lifestyle factors. And if they are dialed in, then we're really on a healthy track. The other side with this stuff, guys, is that if it's getting like a domino effect. Like if we start gaining weight due to overeating, let's just simplify it by that. These leptin signals begin to break down, because fat cells, that breaks the leptin signaling. So the more fat cells that we have, the less strength that this has, the leptin hunger. You think it would work the other way, but it actually works. It doesn't work that way at all. You'd think, okay, if I've got enough fat, that's going to tell my brain, hey, I've got enough fuel here to survive. But it actually works the other way. It actually says, hey, I've got fat. It's here for a reason. Why is it here? Okay, I'm going to keep on eating food, or I'm going to keep on sending that signal. And you might think of those people, and it's a pretty sad situation to be in, because it really, I don't think it's their fault. I'm not a big believer in free will. I think a lot of the decisions are just caused by the environment and the situation we put ourselves in. And if you put yourself in an unhealthy environment, unfortunately, that can just, it's just going to lead from one thing to another. And that's where, well, us as coaches or everyday athletes or healthy-minded people can help you mates get through that and seek help. Sleep. This is a big one. I talked about sleep a little bit just now. Our sleep works with our cortisol. Think of the sun coming up, cortisol goes up, the sun goes down, the cortisol goes down. Sleep, the 8-hour mark gets thrown around a lot, and that's where most of the research has been done with sleep. Can just fix so many issues. Like, it's going to fix your blood sugar, it's going to fix your cortisol. You'll find that everything will improve digestion as well when sleep's dialed in. Say if you're getting 5 hours of sleep, the blood sugar the next day will be fluctuating, and that's when it can cause us to overeat, and then we're on that unhealthy spiral again. So really, this is the lowest hanging fruit that we can do. Okay, we've covered a lot there, guys. I'm going to get you to ask some questions now about hormones. Just give it a little bit longer if you've got any questions about any of that, remembering what we covered there. We covered leptin, talked a lot about cortisol, talked about the cycle of cortisol and fat storage. A lot of it came back to rhythm, stress, leptin, sleep. How do we measure them? Yeah, so hormones we can measure through what's called well, we can measure them in a number of ways. Bloods can measure them, and bloods will measure the bound hormone, so the hormone has bound to the cell. But if we want to get a better indication of how to measure our hormones, a saliva test is good. A saliva will test the free hormones that are circulating around the body, ready to be used. But the gold standard is the one that I offer, which is the Dutch test. And the Dutch test is it's a urine test, and it measures both the bound hormones and the free hormones. So we can get a full hormonal panel from a Dutch test. Good to do. Often hormones will be an indication of something else. So we'll see the hormones, oh, these are funky, but often they're connected to a gut or maybe some blood sugar issues. And that's when you've got to look into how the person lives to get an indication. Undereating on hormones, yeah, a lot. Thyroid for one. So chronic undereating, you'll see this perfect example is the question was, what is the effect of undereating on hormones? So the undereating, so let's call it a hypocaloric diet, and it's best seen with bodybuilders, both male and female, but females tend to have the most obvious symptoms of chronic undereating. This is where we can see thyroid issues, hypothyroid for one, where the thyroid, which is in every cell of the body, will start to cause havoc. Essentially, hair can fall out, you can find skin issues, and let alone the weight gain that can happen later on. But what you'll find is usually a suppression of hormones, so a suppression of estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, because the body is almost going into survival mode. If you think about it, famine's the best example, because evolutionarily we've been through a lot of famines before. The body's going to protect itself, so it's going to protect itself by producing less hormones, and that's where the body can start breaking down. A really good example of what the effect is on stress here. So someone who is chronically undereating, their cortisol is going to go up at the start. And so often this is an interesting one, because often they'll feel good when they start undereating or they start this new diet. They're like, yeah, feeling good. Blood sugar is usually higher because they're looking for food. Cortisol is usually higher because they're looking for food. You've got to think, if the brain's like, shit, haven't eaten in a while, your eyes, it's funny, you feel more energy, and so it can actually feel enlightening. And people are like, oh, I must be in keto now, or this must be the diet working. And it's like, no, your body's just upregulated all your hormones because it really wants to eat. And that's an example of the acute distress here, where our upregulation of hormones. Eventually, the body's going to be like, doesn't look like we're eating. I'm going to start crashing these hormones to protect myself again. And so that's probably the best example of how chronic undereating can affect our hormones. And you can see this with ladies when they try and get pregnant, if they are trying to get their period back. Often it comes back to it's really unfortunate in society as well, to a stage of undereating they went through in their teens. And that can take quite a while to get back to get back to a normal hormone production. Just like long periods of stress are not good. High periods of stress are good. They're actually that can have a favorable effect on the body. If you exercise is the best example. Yeah, Mika, I haven't talked about the recommended split. I can do that with everyone just by email. I'll tell you what sort of activity you're doing, and I can tell you how many proteins, carbs, and fats that I recommend. The reason I'm not going to do it here is because it's going to be different for everyone's goals. So say if you want to lose fat, your macros, proteins, carbs, and fats are going to be different to someone who's looking for performance and who's looking for muscle gain or mass gain. But definitely reach out and I can tell you those pretty easily. That's just an equation. Okay, we're going to soldier on, guys. So, we're nearly at the end. What should I do now? So this is a seminar about fat loss. So if you're interested in losing a bit of fat, it's important to know these are all the key aspects. So caloric deficit's number one. So we need to be eating less than we are expending. But as we found out that it goes a lot deeper than that. Protein is so important with this stuff. If we are eating enough protein, then that's going to put us into a place where it's easier to eat less and harder to overeat. So getting sufficient protein, I often, when I work with people and they want to lose fat, I just say, eat as much as you want, but I want you to eat 150 grams of protein. They're like, oh, great, I can eat as much as I want. And I know this knowing that they're going to tap out at like 1,800 calories. And that's a little win for me. Because they've eaten 150 grams of protein, you probably don't really want to eat any more. And protein's also got a thermic effect on the body where it tends to help us burn fat as well. Really is a wonder nutrient. Keep carbs and fats tailored to performance. I think that's the best advice I can give there. Carbs, performance related. So the more training you're doing, the more you're going to need. Fats, responsible for hormone production. Fats are a funny one. People tolerate them differently. They're not connected to weight gain as much as was once thought. Although if you're eating a heap of fats, then yes, your calories are going to be higher. But it can be very effective for balancing your blood sugar in the same way that protein can. So if you're having a heap of protein and fat, or a sufficient amount of protein and fat, you'll just find that you're not that hungry, and you can get by 8 hours of not eating just from one meal. Anti-inflammatory diet's got a lot to do with this. If our inflammation is low, we're not going to be getting those cravings. Hormone signaling is going to be good, and we'll generally be feeling well. And sleep is so important. Our lowest hanging fruit, I think, is sleep. If we all slept better, then a lot of the problems we'd have would not be there. Stress, we talked about the effect that can have on the diet. And movement. Movement is so important. And you guys have definitely demonstrating that with the workouts you've been doing in class and at home. This, I think, is an interesting one. This is from a guy called Alan Aragon. He's one of the best, or the most prominent researcher when it comes to muscle gain and fat loss body composition. He's a really interesting guy to follow. He's really on board with a lot of the research that comes out. And he's gone in a couple of directions. But what he's come up with is that the most important factor when it comes to long-term weight loss or long-term body composition is the why, all the mindset stuff behind it. And I don't think this gets talked about enough, like figuring out why you want to do something. This is important with exercise or anything that we're doing. If we've got that worked out, then that's our strongest driver. That can help us do anything. Next one, realistic goals. Like if you're thinking 10 kilos in 10 weeks, forget about it. Like you could probably do that if you went on a really hypercaloric diet. That, as we found out, that's not going to be good for us long term. So I'm going to talk about how much weight you should be losing if you want to go on a weight loss diet as well pretty soon. And up here, which is the least important, this is when we find tracking and all the stuff that I actually talked about. So yes, all this tracking stuff is important. It's going to help you lose in the short term. But down here, this stuff's going to help long term. This will help us stay healthy. And this is when we talk about tracking macros and nutrient-dense food up there. And it's funny because often we go for these ones straight away without thinking just that layer deeper of why we really want something. Because if we can work that out, then sky's the limit. We can achieve anything. Oh, I love this on the side here. Social and interpersonal support. How important is that right now? Far out. Like doing this stuff on your own, whether it be exercise or eating healthy. Like try being the only healthy eating person in your family or in your social group. It's bloody hard. That's what's so cool about you guys. You've got a little social network that encourages that. Like if you're eating a salad, someone's not going to be like, oh, what are you eating that for? Oh, that looks kind of healthy. Always like that one. Oh, that looks healthy. Okay. Oh. How much should I lose? This is if you're on your weight loss journey, this is important to know. It should take a long time. Like it shouldn't happen overnight. And this annoys me when I see media reports about some celebrity who's lost like 15 kilos in 5 days, because it's so unrealistic. And I'd love to see that celebrity in like 3 months' time, because it all gets put back on. So obviously, like the smaller you are, the less weight you're going to be losing per week. This is like 0.2 kilos is a really good level. I like that sort of weight loss per week, because if you compound that over consistent like efforts and sticking to the process, compound that by 6 months or 12 months, and it's incredible what you can do. But when we're like jump on the scales after a week and we've only lost half a kilo and like, oh, diet's not working. Like, nah, man, you just got to stick to it, and you're very much on track here. And that's where tracking fat and muscle can come in handy as well. Some useful tools. If you want to start tracking your macros, you can do that through MyFitnessPal. Like I mentioned, please reach out and I can tell you what sort of macros you should be aiming for your goals. MyFitnessPal, Chronometer is another one. They both do the same thing. I actually prefer Chronometer because it's a bit neater, but MyFitnessPal's got a bigger database. And that's as simple as downloading it on your phone. You can actually scan through your phone as well. You can scan your foods and it will tell you how many carbs, proteins, and fats. If you want to measure your body comp, you can do an in-body scan with me. I've got my body scanner here. If you haven't done it already, it's just there. And that'll tell you how much body fat you've got, how much muscle mass you've got, water weight, visceral fat, stuff around the organs, where we're holding it. It's good to do every, well, my clients do it every month, but it's good to do it every couple of months just to see if what we're doing is working where you want to go. DEXA scan is the gold standard for body composition. It's pretty invasive and expensive, but it's definitely worth doing. The results with the in-body scan and DEXA are pretty similar too. Measuring body parts are really good, and photos are good as well. And if you're interested in doing some coaching, please come and talk to me. If you just want to like talk about nutrition, I'm happy to just talk with you about nutrition. You don't need to get any coaching. I'm happy just to spend 15 minutes sitting down and even writing up your macros. We can do that as well. But that does us, guys. I mean, we are out of time. And now's an opportunity to ask some questions. So if you've got any questions, please send them along. I have to run to a meeting. Thanks, Steve. You're welcome. That's cool. I'll hold on for another couple of minutes because I've also got a meeting at 5:15, but chance here to ask any questions about any of the above. Cool. Thanks, Yaz. Thanks, Tony. There was no age factor in the calorie calculation. Good question. There was no age included in the calorie calculation. Is that important? So there's been some talk of people needing less or their appetite changing as they get older. So when people get to around 50, 60, their need for protein diminishes. And they're not quite sure whether that's true or not, but it tends to just happen. There's studies backing it up, but we don't know if that's a case of people's just behaviors changing as they get older. If they're not moving as much, maybe they don't need as much protein. Their digestion changing, so the gut may not be able to handle heavier foods. That often happens when people get older as well. In terms of the calorie calculation, there's no age that's inserted into the calculation itself. I'm not sure if that would impact if age would impact someone's calories. One thing I can think of is just movement. Usually people don't move as much when they get older, so that's something that would automatically bring the calories down. But it's important. It's an interesting one with the protein and fats, how they tend to go down as someone ages. But I think it's actually more important to get protein at that time because people tend to not have enough, and we can get muscle wastage and muscle atrophy, which can cause all sorts of problems as well. Okay, guys. Well, that finishes this one. If you liked it, then I don't know, send feedback, I suppose, if you want. And hopefully I can do another one of these. I think I will. Maybe on muscle gain, or I'd love to do one on stress as well, and dig deeper on hormones, because that's a really interesting topic, and we can dig into nutrition a little bit more. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.